Hello and welcome to Profiles in Risk and recording the first episode of 2024. Now it'll probably be like several that come out before that we're recording in 2023 because I am way behind. But this is my first recording of 2024, so if I'm a little rusty, you guys know why. And today I have with me Ross Huart. I think I halfway got
it right.
Founder at EcoClaim. And Ross, first of all, thank you for joining me today. How's it going?
Good. Thanks for having me. Similar to yourself, struggling with the, not struggling, but just getting back in the rhythm of it, first back in the office.
So for the listeners, Ross and I, we're recording on January 15th, and we both just got back from vacation. In his case, from Florida, and in my case, from Japan and South Korea. As in literally last night, we just got back. Today's a Monday. And I am in Kansas City, where last night when I landed, it was -10 Fahrenheit, which is like -20 Celsius, I believe. Hold on, -10 Fahrenheit is -23 Celsius. And he was just telling me that over in Canada, where he's at, they have recently been at -50.
Yeah.
Actually, you said -50 Celsius, which
Celsius, yeah.
is -58 Fahrenheit. I can't even comprehend what
that feels like.
Like, I'm from Costa Rica originally, lived in the Midwest here in the US for about 10 years. So I know what 0 Fahrenheit or -15 Celsius is.
Yeah.
-50 Celsius, I can't even.
Put it this way, my car didn't start, Tony, the first time in, I've lived in Canada 10 years now, originally from the UK. And that is the first time that my car has not started. You have to plug it in so it heats.
Wow. All right. Right. So while we hide away from the ridiculous winter that we're living through right now, we always give the guests a chance to give the elevator pitch. What is EcoClaim?
Absolutely. I mean, EcoClaim is a training certification body that houses a variety of technology and software solutions to help insurers prepare for their road to being net zero as it relates to their carbon footprint. And we've done that through a number of innovative ways. And honestly, the first steps has been focused on behavioral change. You know, as of right now in the insurance industry, if you know property claims, you'll know that typically when a loss occurs, the contractor's first priority is to stabilize the building. And in stabilizing the building, they essentially remove, dispose of, it goes to landfill. Very little thought is actually given to how those materials are disposed of, reused, or where they actually go. And so one of our flagship products that's rolled out in the Canadian market is EcoDivert. And essentially we're training the restoration contractors to divert waste. Now, this might sound small, but when you look and take Canada, around $14 billion of construction related to property claims occurs. Of that, around 5% of that, the waste generated avoids landfill, meaning 95% of waste from construction projects goes to landfill in Canada. So I imagine in the US, it might be even less.
I would
imagine. When you talk about a starting point, you can't have a better starting point from improvement than essentially zero. And now that's part of a much bigger picture. You know, in Canada, much like California now, the government have legislated that insurance companies, banks, financial institutions have to now report their scope 1 to 3 greenhouse gas emissions to the regulator. Now, you may ask, especially in the US market, why does the regulator care about the greenhouse gas emissions of banks and insurance companies? Well, the answer to that is very much like the energy sector. They're going to move towards a cap and trade system, meaning that they are now looking to benchmark the industry's carbon footprint across all the major institutions. Now, once that's been benchmarked by 2030, they'll essentially say, Mr. Bank or Mr. Insurer, these are the greenhouse gas emissions you are authorized to emit in a given year. Should you go over that, there'll be penalties attached in the form of fines, or you'll have to acquire carbon credits to drive down your emissions, much like the energy sector does. Yeah.
This is interesting. So I have had good conversations before on how we need to move insurance away from underwriting dirty oil, dirty fuels, and from investing in them. But it never occurred to me until 2 minutes ago that our claims process has a large effect, right? Like in my mind, even having worked in claims, in my mind, what in my mind, and I've only been in insurance for 15 years. I can only imagine people who have been here for 50, which we have plenty.
Yeah.
But in my mind, my problem, what insurance does is indemnify, right? My policyholder had a loss, got hit by a tornado, had a fire, whatever.
Mhm.
Indemnify. But I'm not doing that construction, right? That's not my people doing that. So never really thought of, do I as the insurer have some responsibility over the waste management, et cetera, of those. It's interesting. It's and I would say that from the macro perspective as a society, yes, because
Right.
why? Because insurance is in a position to have a large effect, right?
Correct.
It's from the regulatory perspective, it's probably easier to force in the US 3,000 PNC carriers, out of which 100 are large. So let's say in the US, it's easier to force 100 large PNC carriers than, I don't know, 100,000 contracts on the subcontracts, or right, like we're bigger, so there's
Yeah.
less of us to regulate.
Yeah.
So
Well, you went straight to the right point there. You mentioned, so if, for listeners, I mean, I'm not going to delve into what scope 1 to 3 emissions are, because that could be a seminar on itself. But scope 3, which you're talking about, so as an insurance company, the London market regulates this. I mean, they're working towards a solution themselves. So they have 3 buckets. You have underwritten assets, which essentially is what they insure, which you referred to. You have invested assets, so what the insurance companies actually invest their money in. Typically, it's real estate, so it's property related. And then you have operational emissions. Those 3 things form an insurance company's scope 3. So in California, the regulator will expect by 2026 insurance companies to be able to provide, whether they want it verified externally yet remains to be seen. In Canada, they will. But they will need a report on each of those. Now, if we look at each one, because I think it's important, and we talked about this briefly at the ITC conference, take underwritten assets. So insurance companies absolutely are in a position, the reason they need to know the carbon footprint of an insured asset, i.e. whether it be a refinery, whether it be a commercial building, they now want to know the embodied carbon of that asset. And the reason they want to know that is that they have to then report on that. Now, you made a point that insurers have the ability to influence. Well, sure, they could say we're not insuring high carbon businesses because we can't meet our requirements. But then that doesn't influence the business. That just reduces the available market for them to secure a reasonably priced policy, because they still need the insurance. So insurers actually are taking a more collaborative approach in how do we support this business in reducing its footprint whilst insuring it. Now, the other piece is the invested assets, very much similar to the underwritten ones, typically are buildings, and the measurement piece needs to be done. Now, those are the 2 areas that the global insurance market is really focused on. Like the Lloyd's market has a partnership with Moody's. The the large accounting data firm, and they're essentially trying to determine a standard by which they will measure all this. Now, one thing no one's really looked at truly is the operational emissions of insurers. And by operational emissions, I'm talking about their claims, because they are a scope 3 just as much. You insure this property, when it has a loss, the loss event is part of your scope 3 because you've insured it. So like, just very much like when banks, a lot of the large banks now have sustainable finance departments. And the reason for that is when they finance a project, is here in Canada especially, they have to report on the carbon footprint of that project.
On the claim side, that's going to be so tough for us.
Right. Yes and no. I mean, if you think about, so what we've developed, it all started essentially, we offered our largest customer here in Canada, Viva. We provide appraisal services on losses. When a loss occurs, we determine the indemnity value essentially independently. And so we turned around and said to Aviva, well, we'll provide you a carbon footprint report. So we'll appraise the embodied carbon as well as the loss. And they love that. However, that's not scalable because it requires people. And so if we were going to bring that to the market, we needed to develop a solution that involved the entire supply chain. So the restoration contractor that shows up to site, they're absolutely key to this. They apply our EcoClaim methodology. Our system tracks the carbon avoidance achieved through the activity and reports it in dashboard format to the insurance company. And now we're also moving towards the commoditization or tokenization, if you will, of carbon as a commodity. So our vision is that we'll essentially be able to create behavioral change through insurance company's supply chain, right? The contractors as an example, but also lots of others. We'll then be able to verify and measure that directly via our software platform and site technology. And we'll then be able to sell and broker that commodity through one singular insurance carbon exchange.
Okay, so in the long term, that gets really interesting.
Right. Because other than being the right thing to do, which in Canada and the UK, the government have said, we want this. So it's not, you don't have an option anymore. In the US, 10 years, I mean, the States is so large that you have different priorities everywhere by state.
This is me banging my head against the desk going like, yes, I know.
Right. And so, but California has said by 2026, they want to start seeing the same requirements that Canada's laid out. Now, how are they going to do that? How are they going to approach that? I don't think anyone really knows. A lot of insurers we talked to in the US weren't even aware that California had stipulated this yet.
When did California say that?
The exact date, it was only about 6 months ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So it's fairly new, but it 2026 they'll require reporting. And again, they're going to create a cap and trade system. The government don't legislate these things and want the information for the good of their health. A cap and trade system creates a commoditized industry that they will ultimately benefit from. Now, it does provide an incentive, though. So let's say it's the right thing to do. You want to do it, which a lot of insurers do, with ESG being a core value to a lot of them. However, in the States, it becomes another question. If you go to an insurance company and say you have $2 billion worth of property claims every year, that's your spend on indemnifying that property claim. If you put our infrastructure, EcoClaim's infrastructure, across your supply chain and your claims, we will be able to commoditize and garner, whether it be voluntary compliant credits, and you'll be able to broker those as a commodity, where it's a different, they're doing the right thing, but they're also incentivized because we're actually able to create a commodity out of something that is already occurring. And I think that's the key piece for the United States market, is once they understand that they can essentially mine carbon from their claims process. Now, it has to be verified because you see far too many stories in the news about falsifying carbon credits. I mean, that's an issue, but that's why our system verifies and can support anything that's done along the way.
Tell me about the training and certification.
Absolutely, yeah.
Already rolled out.
Well, one of the this conversation is quite topical, really, because there is a huge lack of understanding as to what sustainability is, what it means, what is ESG, and even more so, insurance is so nuanced. And when you apply the ESG topic, which can be nuanced to the general public as it is, it becomes even more nuanced when it's applied to the insurance industry. So we realized, everyone from insurance companies to contractors to brokers, we need to set a benchmark, a baseline of understanding and education about what this really means. Like, what are we tracking? Why are we tracking scope 1 to 3? What is scope 1 to 3? Why do insurance companies care? Why do governments care? So we had to find a way to develop a baseline by which to move forward. Now, we're truly creating behavioral change within insurance. You can't do that overnight, and you can't do that in one fell swoop. Behavioral change is incremental. And so that's why we've started with waste diversion, because that's the easiest one to apply. And we have the supply chain on board. So we certify and train both contractors who execute the work. We certify and train insurers, brokers, managing general agents. Now, obviously, the certifications are different in each subsection because of the work they do. But nonetheless, we provide that baseline of knowledge so that everyone can simply do better.
Okay, so for the listeners who are probably heavy US career executives, how do we get started in this?
Yeah, you know, it's everyone thinks you hear sustainability and there's all these visions of grandeur and massive change. And it's really not. Like I said, it's a step function. Large changes happen over essentially a ladder, one step at a time. And so how we've instituted it here and how it would apply in the US, an insurer would essentially sign up. They would take their vendor network, the vendor of contractors and service providers that support their claims. They would essentially begin the training process and then start applying this new methodology, which is essentially, I mean, even in the US, you look outside your home and you likely have more than one garbage bin, right? So why is that not normal on a construction site? Right? Like it's perfectly, you assume that if you've got plastics, they go in this bin. If you've got wood, it goes in this bin. If you've got compost, it goes in this bin. And we've accepted that that's just the right thing to do and makes sense, a circular economy. However, in claims, that's just not the case. And so that's really that's what we're bringing there. So that's the first step. Once the contractors are certified and applying, we then actively track and measure the activity that they're doing. So let's say baseline claims, they mitigate 5% of waste. We're able to demonstrate that the increase in improvement. And then we move forward with things such as dry in place. So rather than remove and replace materials, there's you can dry in place. So rather than remove, which is often the contractor's easiest thing to do. Okay. Why try and dry this? It might not dry, and then we might not get paid, and all these things are real. And so they tear it out and replace it. However, we're saying if we dry it in place, we can measure an avoided amount of carbon from the replacement. And then moving one step further, rebuild better. You know, when an insurance loss occurs, there is so much automation now around it So automation of scopes, automation of tracking the loss, automation of videoing the loss. You know, you have Matterport, so you can do site walkthroughs. Why don't we have rebuild better? So what we're proposing is when a loss occurs, we are able to automate the reconstruction requirements to demonstrate sustainable improvements. So more sustainable materials, methodologies, and then the differential is then measured of what would have gone back like kind and quality. So I guess in short, the answer to your question, how does anyone get started on a journey? Step one, take the baseline course, understand what sustainability means to the insurance world, and understand the legislation coming down the pipeline. Step two, and it sounds silly, is having your contractors divert waste and measuring it. Now, for some reason, this has come off as a little bit revolutionary in the market here with all the customers we've adopted. And often I think the best ideas do sound like that once they're off the ground. But to me, I feel like I'm just peddling something that we should all do as good members of society, is try to create a circular economy. And that starts with simply mitigating your waste on a claim.
What is the origin story for EcoClaim? How did it come to be?
So I'm a quantity surveyor, chartered surveyor by technical training, and something surveyors are able to do is assess the embodied carbon of an asset, a building. There's standards for it and what have you. Now, Aviva were the first global insurance company to announce they were going to be net zero by 2050. And so me being the entrepreneur I am, and Aviva being our biggest customer at the time, I saw an opportunity that if they're going to be net zero, they have no way of essentially measuring and tracking their supply chain, their claims. And construction accounts for around 50% of the greenhouse gases emitted annually around the world. And so I approached them and said, well, when we assess your claims, we'll provide an assessment, an embodied carbon, and a mitigation plan. So they liked it. Then the British Columbia floods happened. For those listeners that may not be familiar, they had the 1 in 1,000 year flood 2 years ago, completely flooded mainland Vancouver, surrounding areas, and caused substantial amount of damage. The insurer decided this was going to be the best time to pilot a climate change initiative, given the fact that this was the 7th or so time it occurred. So I don't think it's any longer 1 in 1,000 years. And so what better time to demonstrate attempting to make a difference during a weather-related catastrophe that arguably could be caused by climate change. Now, I say arguably because I believe the climate is changing. Where the argument comes in is
because
why?
this is a US podcast.
Correct. Yes, correct.
And the US is an alternate reality from the civilized world. I get it.
I mean,
pains me every day.
You just have to look. I mean, climate has changed globally for millennia, right? That's undisputable. Ice Age, dinosaurs, the rest of it. What people are actually arguing about now is human activity causing climate change. The climate is changing, so whether we're causing it or not is everyone's own opinion. But the fact is, it is changing. Weather-related events are increasing dramatically, and so we have a duty of care to respond to that, I think.
And as an industry in insurance, we are deeply affected by those, right? We pay for those claims, and we have to reserve for those. We have to price for those. Sometimes, decades ahead of actually paying those losses. It's a very complicated thing we do.
And it all gets passed back to the consumer at the end of the day. Now, for us, during this catastrophe, we were given 100 claims by the insurer and essentially applied EcoClaim's process and measurement. And again, it was a pilot, so this was the first time it had ever been done or ever been tried this way. So as with all pilots, there was roadblocks that had to be solved. But at the end of the day, we demonstrated that there was, I think it was 63% of waste on those claims avoided landfill. And that was just the first ever pilot. And so, I mean, that was a 50% mitigation rate. And I think that was around, if I remember rightly, about 53 tons of CO2 was avoided as a result of that activity. And we demonstrated in I guess, a relatively small claim sample, 100 claims is small, but we demonstrated there and then that behavioral change could have a huge impact on the environment. And so once we'd completed that, we stepped back because we provided it as a service initially, right? So that each of those claims had a consultant on that was working with the contractors. Now, that's not scalable because that just increases claim expense, which we're cognizant of. You know, that anyone can be sustainable if you throw lots of money at it. The key for us is how do we bring sustainable solutions, technology, and innovation without them being financially onerous? And that's essentially what we've done.
Okay, so sustainability without being financially onerous, that's music, or it will become music to a lot of executives' ears as we're forced down that path. Which, to make it clear, I'm pro regulation.
Yeah,
especially compared to a lot of Americans. All right, and this is a fairly new effort, right? You started
2 years ago. We started incubating EcoClaim within MBC Group, my engineering firm. We then, as of October last year, brought EcoClaim out and incorporated, and it's its own entity now, serving customers in Canada, and we hope to be in the US in the not too distant future with it.
Fantastic. Just before we start recording, you were telling me about the incubator.
Yes, so we've been invited to the Columbia University Accelerator Program, which is held by Metaprop VC. They're a prop tech venture capital firm, and they have a program. I think it's a 6-month program with Columbia University. So essentially, we've been asked to join as part of the intake. And there's only a handful of companies that do get asked to go there. And we plan to go there and map out our product, map out the US market, and see how we can bring this to fruition here in the US with their support.
Congratulations. Look forward to seeing you continue to grow this very important. Thank you for the work that you guys are doing.
No, thank you for having me, Tony. I know it's you're a busy guy with lots of guests, so yeah, I appreciate it.
And this has been one of the more difficult interviews I've done in a while, because I'm so unfamiliar with this side of the world, and we have done almost 500 episodes. We've recorded more than 500. Episode 499 went live today, so episode 500 goes tomorrow. And in that many episodes, we really don't talk about this. So that that tells you like how it really is.
What I'd like to do, Tony, is I'd like to get you on us, but I'd like to invite you to take one of our eco baseline. We have them online, so you don't have to go anywhere. But honestly, I think it would be very valuable and give you information now and into the future, and especially for your listeners. And I think that's really the purpose of why we set that up, because you're not alone. I mean, the amount of insurance industry professionals that really don't understand how this is going to affect their jobs and their companies, and it will.
All of them.
Yeah.
Come on.
So
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for your time today. Email me that info. It'll probably be mid-February by the time we get this one out. And once it goes out, I'll tag you on LinkedIn. And yeah, looking forward to see you guys continue to grow.
excellent. Thanks, Tony.